In this lesson, we're going to be looking at roots and zeros of polynomial functions. So in this first example, this is basically a review of 8-2, because we're kind of doing the same thing where they had to find the factors. They're giving us a 0 already, and we have to find the other zeros. So we're going to be finding the factors of this polynomial. They gave us one, which is 4, which actually looks like x minus 4. So that's one of the factors. We have to find the other two. And I know there's a total of 3 because the exponent on the highest variable is a 3 right there. So my polynomial is in descending order from greatest to least. And since there's a 3, the exponent, the highest one, that means there's going to be 3 factors. So we're going to find the factors and then find the zeros from there. And if you remember, the zeros mean if I put the number in my equation, my polynomial, solve it, my answer would be 0. So that's where it's going to cross the x-axis, so that would be 0. So we're going to use synthetic division, and this is the only type of problem we can use synthetic when they give us a number. If they give us, a 0, like this one is 4, I'm underlining red. If they gave us one with an imaginary number, then we cannot use synthetic division. And we're going to do an example like this. So right now we're going to use synthetic division, so I'm going to have 4. Then write my coefficients, that's 1, negative 10, 34, and negative 40. So I bring down the 1, then I take 4 times 1, which is 4. We're going to add these together. So that's going to be negative 6. Then take that times 4, which would be negative 24. Add those together, which is 10. 4 times 10 is 40. Add those together, I get 0. And that's my remainder, which is good. Since it's a remainder, then that means my x minus 4 is a factor. So now I'm going to write my answer as a polynomial. So I have 1x squared, or just x squared. You always start with 1 less than what your original equation started with. So it started with a 3 in the exponent. This starts with a 2. Minus 6x plus 10. Alright, so the x squared minus 6x plus 10 is another factor of my original equation, and so is the x minus 4. But we need to break down this into two binomials like that. So we need to factor that, and sometimes they're not as easily to see that they're factorable. So we're going to use the quadratic formula, and you can always use the quadratic formula when you are trying to find factors of a polynomial. So I'm going to go to the next page, and we're going to use the quadratic formula to find the other factors, which will help us find the zeros. Alright, so I got my equation, I got my quadratic formula, now I got to find my a, b, and c. So my a is 1, it's a coefficient on the x squared. My b is negative 6, it's a coefficient on the x. And my c is my constant. So I'm just going to substitute all those into my equation, quadratic formula, and solve for that. So it's going to be negative 6. I have 2 negatives because the equation has a negative b. So it has a negative, but also my b equals negative 6. That's why I have 2 negatives. Plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared, because it's b squared, minus 4 times 1 times 10, all over 2 times 1, your a. So that's going to equal 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared is 36, and 4 times 1 times 10 is 40, so it's minus 40 all over 2. So that's going to be 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 all over 2. And since we have a negative underneath our square root, that means it's imaginary, so I got to pull that negative out of there. So if you remember back in, I think it was chapter 5 maybe, 5 or 6, that I would have then 6 plus or minus, pull out the negative, which means it's an imaginary, square root of 4 all over 2. I'm going to finish up on the next slide because I don't have enough room here. Alright, so there's my equation again. So I'm going to start simplifying this. So I have 6 plus or minus I, and the square root of 4 is 2, all over 2. So we're going to put the 2 in front of the I, so it's really 6 plus or minus 2I over 2. Now I can simplify that even further. So I look at the 6 into the 2. That simplifies down to 3. Then I look at the 2 in the 2. That simplifies down to 1. So I have 3 plus or minus 1I, or just I. You don't need to put the 1, but if you want to, you can. So then my final answer is, to separate those, I have 3 plus I and 3 minus I. So those are my zeros. And so now I have those three factors. I have the x minus 4, the 3 plus I, and the 3 minus I. So my final answer then would be 4, 3 plus I, and 3 minus I. So that would be my answer. Those are my zeros. And those are also, if I would write them in factored form, then it would be x minus 4, x minus 3 plus I, and x minus 3 minus I. So that's how they would be written as factors, but they don't want those written as factors. They just want us to find the zeros on there. All right, we'll go to our next problem here, and we have x cubed plus 7x squared plus 25x plus 175, and one of the zeros is 5I. So this one's going to be a little bit different, so I'm going to go through it. If you need to stop the video, please do. To review over it, go back so you can see what I'm doing on there. So my polynomial is in descending order. Goes cubed, squared, first, and x to the 0 power. So it's greatest to least. I'm not missing any. If I was missing any x to a certain power, I'd have to put a 0 in there to replace that. But I'm not missing any, so I don't have to worry about that. Alright, so one of my zeros is 5I, and one of the theorems, the complex conjugate theorem, says that if 5I, if you have an imaginary number, plus the coefficient of 5 or whatever, any number, then its opposite is also a 0. So the opposite of that would be negative 5I. So really, I already have 2 of my answers. I just had to find the third one. Once again, I know I have 3 of them because my exponent right there is 3, so I have 2 of them right now, and now I have to find the third one. So anytime you have a number with an I, then you can do the opposite, and that'll give you the other one. So you'll have 2 right away, and then you have to find the third. But before we can do that, we got to find out, we have to use the 5I and the negative 5I to find out our third one. So we have x plus 5I and x minus 5I. We're going to FOIL that, so I'd have x squared plus 5ix minus 5ix minus 25I squared. Because 5I times negative 5I is negative 25. So I'm going to add my like terms. So these are going to cancel out because I have a positive and negative. And if you remember, I squared equals negative 1. So really, this I squared represents negative 1. So I have negative 25 times negative 21, or excuse me, negative 25 times negative 1 is 25. So, cleaning it all up, I have x squared plus 25. So we're going to use x squared plus 25 to divide and find our third 0 on there. So first of all, we can't use x squared plus 25. Let me explain this first. So we're missing the middle x term, so we're going to have x squared plus 0x plus 25. That's what we're going to use to divide our original equation to find our answer. So in the past, when we've used long division, we've never had 3 terms to divide by. We only had 2. But since we have the x squared, then we have to have an x, then we have to have a constant. So now we're going to have 3. So that's why we have to use long division. We cannot use synthetic. So we're going to start dividing this. So what times x squared would give me x cubed, which would be x. And so that would be x cubed. Then take the x times the 0x, it would be 0x squared. Then the x times the 25, which would be 25x. And then we subtract them when we use long division. So when I subtract them, then I get those cancel out the first terms, 7x squared plus 0x, bring down your 175, and then start all over again. So what times, go back up here, what times x squared gives me 7x squared? Well, it's going to be 7. So 7x squared, then take the 7 times the 0x squared, which would be 0x. Then the 7 times the 125, which would be 175. Subtract those, and you're going to get 0. So that's your remainder, which is good, because that means then I have, then that x plus 7 is a factor. So I was glad it was turned out to be 0 there. So my first one at the beginning, they gave me 5i. I knew the opposite was also 1. And then now I know that x plus 7, set that equals 0, minus 7, so x equals negative 7 is my third one. So those are my zeros. So that would be my answer there. Once again, take your time, stop it, rewind if you need to go over this again. Alright, our last example, they are giving me the zeros, which are negative 1, 2, and 3. So they want us to write a polynomial from this. So they mean, what did we multiply together, or excuse me, they gave us all these. So these are the factors. We have to find out the original equation. Before, they always gave us the original equation, and we had to find all these right here. So I wrote them, and it's always the opposite. So negative 1 would be plus 1, 2 would be negative 2, 3 would be negative 3. So I'm going to FOIL the first two. So to save time there, I just FOILed the x plus 1, x minus 2, and then I got the x squared minus x minus 2. Now I'm going to multiply that by x minus 3. So everything, the x in the x minus 3 has to go times everything in the original one, the first one, and then the 3 has to get multiplied in there. So we have to multiply this times that, and that, and we have to multiply this times that, and that. Alright, so you can see in the green I've done that, so I've multiplied those two together, the x squared minus x minus 2 times the x minus 3, and everything in the green is what I got. Now I'm going to add my like terms, and once I do that I have x cubed, so I'm done with that. Get my x squares together, which would be negative 4x squared, and get my x's together, which would be 1x, or just x, and then I have my plus 6. So that would be my answer. So I've now written a polynomial from my original zeros, the negative 1, 2, and 3. So now we have x cubed minus 4x squared plus x plus 6. So like before, they gave us that, and we always had to go backwards, and find all the factors or the zeros. This time they gave us the zeros and the factors. We had to find the original polynomial. So this is the lesson for that. And once again, like always, take your time, go back, review, stop. Anything you need to understand those, and take your time on there, and good luck to you. Bam!